Dr. Eleanor Vance, a neuroscientist haunted by a past tragedy, sought solace in Havenwood, Vermont. This idyllic hamlet, nestled deep within the Green Mountains, promised the quiet she desperately craved, a stark contrast to the relentless demands of Boston. Her newly renovated cabin, a rustic haven on the town's secluded outskirts, offered the solitude she needed, its old timbers whispering secrets of the ancient forest that enveloped it. She hoped the profound silence would mend her weary soul on this cold, clear night in early November 2025. Eleanor meticulously arranged her research notes. It was 11:50 p.m. EST. A sense of quiet anticipation settled over her. The cabin was truly hers now, a blank slate for a new beginning. She had heard the local rumors about the ancient, disused clock tower in the town square, a relic whose gears had long seized, its hands frozen at a perpetual 3:15. Yet, a peculiar legend persisted. Every night, precisely at midnight, a single deep, resonant chime would echo through the valley, a sound no one could explain. Eleanor, ever the scientist, dismissed it as a charming eccentricity, perhaps a hidden mechanism or a unique atmospheric phenomenon. Still, a subconscious curiosity piqued by the persistent local lore made her pause, a cup of herbal tea warming. Her hands, the silence in the cabin was profound, broken only by the gentle crackle of the fire and the whisper of the wind through the surrounding trees. The remoteness of her cabin meant the sound, if it came, would be unnervingly clear. She found herself listening, despite her skepticism, her breath held in the crisp, cold air. Then it happened. The air vibrated, not with the sharp metallic clang of a modern bell, but with a sound far older, deeper, and more resonant. It was a single drawn-out chime, impossibly rich and mournful, that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the valley. It passed through the cabin walls as if they were made of mist, not just heard, but felt a low thrumming in her chest that left a strange, lingering echo. Eleanor's scientific mind immediately began to dissect the phenomenon. Acoustics, atmospheric pressure, hidden seismic activity. She ran through every plausible explanation. Yet, a subtle disquiet settled over her. The sound had been too perfect, too deliberate for a random occurrence. It carried an ancient weight, a sense of purpose that defied easy categorization, hinting at something beyond her understanding. She tried to shake off the unsettling feeling, attributing it to the novelty of her new surroundings and the lingering stress of her past. She made a note in her journal, detailing the time and the peculiar quality of the chime, a neuroscientist's instinct to document the anomaly. But as she lay in bed, the silence that followed the chime felt different, heavier, as if something had been awakened by the sound. Sleep came fitfully. Eleanor found herself plagued by fragmented dreams, not of her past trauma, but of strange, shifting shadows and indistinct whispers just beyond her grasp. She woke several times, a cold sweat on her brow, convinced she heard faint, distant murmurs carried on the wind, too soft to decipher, yet undeniably present, brushing against the edges of her consciousness. The following morning, heavenward seemed to wear a subtle, almost imperceptible pallor. The usual morning greetings from the few locals she encountered felt strained, their smiles a little too fixed, their eyes holding a distant, unfocused quality. Eleanor, ever observant, noted the slight tremor in the hand of the barista at the general store, the way a woman in the bakery stared blankly at a shelf of bread, as if lost in thought. Eleanor dismissed these observations as the product of her own overactive imagination, a byproduct of her recent move and the unsettling midnight chime. But as the day progressed, a growing sense of unease began to gnaw at her. The town, with its quaint charm, now felt subtly off-kilter, like a beautiful painting with a single disturbing brushstroke that couldn't be unseen. The memory of the resonant chime lingered, a chilling promise of what was to come. The second night brought the chime again. Precisely at midnight, its single deep note resonating with an even greater intensity than before. Eleanor was awake, waiting, her analytical mind poised to capture every detail. The sound seemed to penetrate deeper, settling in her bones, and with it came a chilling clarity to the fragmented whispers she had heard in her dreams. They were no longer indistinct. They were voices, a chorus of murmurs just beyond the threshold of understanding, yet undeniably present, whispering her name. Her scientific skepticism, once her fortress, began to show cracks. She spent the next day meticulously reviewing her notes, cross-referencing local geological data, even attempting to find any historical records of the clock tower's supposed malfunction. Every logical explanation evaporated, leaving only the unsettling reality of the unexplained. The town's peculiar atmosphere persisted, a collective tension that hummed beneath the surface of everyday interactions, a silent hum of dread. Driven by a growing need for answers, Eleanor decided to visit Silas Thorne, the reclusive town historian. His house, a labyrinth of dusty books and forgotten artifacts, smelled of old paper and something ancient and earthy. Silas, with his piercing eyes and a perpetual air of knowing too much, initially warned her away, his voice raspy with an unspoken dread. "Some things," he rasped, "are best left undisturbed, Doctor. Heavenwood holds more than just history." But Eleanor, persistent and desperate for a rational explanation, pressed him. She spoke of the chime, the whispers, the subtle changes she observed in the townsfolk. Silas listened, his expression grim, then finally relented. He spoke of the veil, a thin place in Havenwood where reality frayed, and of an ancient pact, long forgotten, tied to the clock tower and its midnight toll. He spoke in riddles, hinting at a collective madness that had afflicted the town generations ago, triggered by the very sound she now heard. It was during this conversation that Leila Thorne, Silas's 10-year-old granddaughter, entered the room. Her eyes, unnervingly bright, fixed on Eleanor. "The bell calls them," she said, her voice a soft, childlike whisper. "The ones who sleep in the earth." She held up a drawing, a crude depiction of the clock tower, surrounded by shadowy figures. With vacant eyes, their mouths open in silent screams. A cold dread ran down Eleanor's spine, chilling her to the bone. Lila's words and drawing were not the ramblings of a child. They were too specific, too unsettling. Eleanor, despite her scientific training, felt a primal fear stir within her. The whispers in her cabin intensified that night, no longer just murmurs, but distinct voices calling her name, weaving tales of her past tragedy, twisting her guilt and grief into sharp, agonizing barbs. The entity, whatever it was learning her vulnerabilities, dissecting her very soul. The third day brought a noticeable shift in the town. More people seemed to be experiencing the same unfocused stares, the same distant quality in their eyes. Conversations would drift, sentences left unfinished. Eleanor observed a group of townsfolk gathered near the clock tower, staring up at its silent face, their expressions a mixture of reverence and terror. It was a shared delusion, slowly, insidiously taking root, consuming them from within. Eleanor's own sleep became a battleground. Vivid, disturbing visions plagued her. The clock tower weeping black ichor, shadowy figures dancing in the town square, their movements jerky and unnatural. She saw faces she knew, distorted and grotesque, their eyes hollow. The line between dream and reality blurred, making her question her own sanity, making her doubt every perception. Silas, seeing Eleanor's distress, became her reluctant confidant. He shared fragments of Havenwood's dark history, of unexplained disappearances, of families driven to madness, always after periods of intense midnight chimes. He spoke of an ancient hunger that fed on the unraveling of human minds, a force tied to the very foundations of the town, a malevolent presence that had slumbered for centuries. As the fourth midnight approached, Eleanor felt a growing dread. The chime was no longer just a sound. It was a signal, a key turning in a lock, opening something ancient and terrifying within Havenwood. Her scientific mind, once so resolute, now felt like a fragile shield against an encroaching tide of madness. The whispers were louder, clearer, beckoning her towards a truth she was terrified to uncover, a truth that promised only oblivion. The fourth midnight chime was not just a sound. It was a physical blow, a wave of resonant energy that slammed into Eleanor's cabin, rattling the windows and sending a tremor through the floorboards. This time, the whispers were no longer confined to the edges of her hearing. They were a cacophony, 1,000 voices screaming her name, tearing at the fabric of her mind, twisting her deepest fears into grotesque realities. Her past trauma, the very reason she had fled Boston, became the entity's most potent weapon. Visions of the accident, of the choices she had made, played out before her eyes with horrifying clarity, each detail magnified, each moment of guilt amplified. The whispers accused her, condemned her, until she found herself curled on the floor, sobbing, convinced of her own unforgivable culpability. Her rational mind, her scientific training, crumbled under the relentless assault, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. The town, too, descended further into the shared delusion. Eleanor ventured out, desperate for any sign of normalcy, but found only a disturbing tableau. Townsfolk walked aimlessly, their eyes glazed, muttering to themselves. Some stood transfixed before the clock tower, their faces upturned, as if awaiting a revelation. A few engaged in bizarre, ritualistic behaviors, arranging stones in strange patterns or humming discordant tunes, their movements unsettlingly synchronized. Silas, though still lucid, showed alarming signs of the encroaching madness. His stories became more disjointed, his eyes darting nervously, as if he saw things that weren't there. He clutched a worn, leather-bound journal, muttering about the patterns and the cycle, his words a desperate attempt to impose order on the chaos that was consuming Havenwood, a town unraveling before their very eyes. Lila, however, seemed to be navigating the madness with an unnerving clarity. Her drawings became more detailed, more disturbing, depicting the shadowy figures from her earlier sketch, now intertwined with the townsfolk, their forms merging. She spoke of the bell's song and the sleepers waking, her childish voice chillingly devoid of fear, as if she was merely observing a natural phenomenon. A grotesque puppet show. Eleanor tried to reason with the few townsfolk who still seemed capable of coherent thought, but her words were met with blank stares or dismissive murmurs. Their reality was shifting, their perceptions warped by the constant, insidious influence of the midnight chime. They believed in the sleepers, in the waking, in the strange rituals they now performed, their faces alight with a disturbing conviction that her scientific instruments, once her trusted allies, now seemed useless. Her brain scans showed erratic neural activity in her own mind. Her sleep patterns were completely disrupted, and her attempts to record the chime yielded only static. The entity was not a physical phenomenon. It was a psychic one, a force that preyed on the very essence of consciousness, a predator of the mind. The cabin, once her sanctuary, became a place of torment. The old timbers groaned not with the wind, but with unseen presences. Shadows writhed in the corners, and the whispering wind through the trees seemed to carry the distorted voices of her past, calling to her, inviting her into the shared delusion that was consuming Havenwood, a town swallowed by its own dark history. Eleanor's own thoughts began to fragment, her memories blurring, her sense of self eroding. She found herself staring blankly at her reflection, unsure of the face staring back. The whispers, no longer just external, began to merge with her own internal monologue, making it impossible to distinguish her thoughts from the entity's insidious suggestions. A terrifying echo chamber of madness died as the sixth night approached. Eleanor knew with a chilling certainty that Havenwood was lost. The town was a collective nightmare, a living embodiment of madness, and she, despite her scientific training, was being inexorably drawn into its terrifying embrace. The midnight chime was not just a signal. It was a siren song, luring them deeper into the abyss of shared delusion. A point of no return. The sixth midnight chime was the loudest yet, a deafening, resonant boom that shook the very foundations of Eleanor's cabin. It was followed by a chorus of screams from the town, a chilling symphony of terror and madness. Eleanor, her mind fractured, stumbled out into the night, drawn by an irresistible, terrifying compulsion towards the town square, towards the silent, ancient clock tower, its dark silhouette looming against the sickly glow of a rising moon. Havenwood was a scene of utter chaos, illuminated by the pale, mocking moonlight. Townsfolk, their eyes wide and vacant, moved with jerky, unnatural movements, like puppets on invisible strings. Some were dancing in macabre circles, others were digging frantically at the earth near the clock tower, their hands raw and bleeding. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, fear, and something else, something metallic and ancient, a stench of decay and forgotten secrets. Silas Thorne was there too, his face a mask of profound despair. He was trying to pull Lila away from a group of townsfolk who were chanting in a low, guttural language, their voices resonating with the same unnatural depth as the chime. Lila, however, resisted, her small hands clutching a handful of freshly dug earth, her eyes fixed on the clock tower with an unnerving reverence, a chilling acceptance. Eleanor pushed through the throng, her own mind a maelstrom of conflicting thoughts and fragmented memories. The whispers were a roar now, urging her to join the others, to embrace the truth that the bell had revealed. She saw the faces of the townsfolk, contorted by a shared, horrifying ecstasy, their bodies swaying rhythmically to an unheard tune, their movements a grotesque dance of surrender. As she reached the base of the clock tower, a horrifying realization dawned on her. The earth around the tower was not just disturbed, It was excavated, revealing a network of ancient, shallow graves. And from these graves, not bodies, but skeletal hands, long and impossibly thin, were slowly, deliberately reaching upwards, their bony fingers switching, beckoning to the living. Layla, her voice clear and unervingly calm amidst the madness, pointed to the clock tower. "The bell calls them home," she said, her eyes fixed on Eleanor, ancient wisdom in their depths. "It always has. They sleep in the earth, waiting for the chime to wake them." Eleanor looked at the clock tower, its silent face mocking her, and then at the reaching hands, and the pieces of Silas's riddles clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. The ancient hunger Silas had spoken of was not a metaphor, it was real. The chime was not just a signal, it was an awakening, a psychic pulse that stirred the long-dead, parasitic entities buried beneath heavenwood, entities that fed on the sanity of the living, drawing them into a collective delusion that made them willing participants in their own demise. Their minds consumed as the moon reached its zenith, casting long grotesque shadows. The skeletal hands began to pull themselves free from the earth, their movements slow, deliberate, and horrifyingly purposeful. They were not seeking to harm, they were seeking to merge. The townsfolk, their faces alight with a terrifying joy, began to reach out, offering their hands, their bodies, their very minds to the skeletal forms, embracing their oblivion. Eleanor watched in frozen horror as a skeletal hand reached for Silas, and he, with a final, heartbreaking look of resignation, took it. His body stiffened, then slumped, his eyes going as vacant as a doll's. He was gone, absorbed into the collective, his mind consumed, his essence now part of the ancient hunger that plagued Havenwood. Then Leela turned to Eleanor, her eyes longer childlike but ancient, filled with an unsettling wisdom. "It's time, Doctor," she whispered, her voice no longer her own, but a resonant echo of the midnight chime itself. "The bell calls for you too." A skeletal hand, impossibly thin and cold, reached out from the earth directly at Eleanor's feet, its bony fingers beckoning, promising a horrifying peace. Eleanor screamed, a sound that was swallowed by the collective joyful murmurs of the townsfolk as they embraced their skeletal partners. She stumbled backward, away from the reaching hand, away from Lila's ancient eyes, away from the horrifying truth of Havenwood. But as she fled, a new chilling sensation crept over her. The whispers in her mind were gone, replaced by a single, deep, resonant chime, echoing not from the clock tower, but from within her own skull. She was free of the madness, but she was not alone. The bell had found a new home,